U.S. President Donald Trump has delayed again his deadline for Iran to seal a deal or face severe strikes on its civilian infrastructure in a profanity-filled social media post this past weekend. Hello, hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, April 6th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Pundits here in the country believe this particular week may prove to be quite crucial in the conflict in the Middle East amid the looming deadline by Mr. Trump and efforts by mediating nations like Pakistan to ease tensions. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Thanks, great to be here.
I also have Chloe Borgnon with French broadcaster France 24. Chloe, it's great to have you with us.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thomas, let's start then with yet another extension by Mr. Trump of the deadline for Iran to open that is, the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, so on Sunday, he posted on Truth Social, as you mentioned, a profane post, a shockingly profane, I would say, but saying that they were going to extend the deadline basically to Tuesday, and then later clarified Tuesday, 8 p.m., U.S. time or Eastern time, and warned that it would be power plant day and bridge day all wrapped up in one, basically threatening to bomb civilian infrastructure, bridges, power plants, which many have pointed out would constitute a war crime. Actually, later on he gave some interviews to other media, during that day too, and told the Wall Street Journal that, again, like threatened if they didn't do anything, they won't have any power plants, won't have any bridges standing, saying it would take around 20 years to rebuild the country if they even have a country, right? And so this is this latest extension. Initially it was March 21st. Trump had given 48 hours before the U.S. started obliterating the power plants. Then a couple days later, he postponed it for 5 days, saying that there were productive talks. Then on March 26th, he extended it for 10 days, which would have been Monday today, but then on Sunday, he did this additional extension. So, we've seen this process going on, and it's, there's so much kind of different information coming in and out of talks and not. I mean, actually today, Axios reported that negotiators are pursuing a 45-day ceasefire, and this is among, I don't know who exactly it is, it's U.S., Iran, and regional mediators. And Trump, I guess, told Axios that his envoys, which is Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are, holding intense negotiations. But there's also been these other negotiations that you had mentioned with Pakistan. Egypt and Turkey were involved, so these kind of indirect negotiations. We've also seen that Oman and Iran were holding negotiations for passage of ships through the strait. And, all these steps along the way, you can see markets reacting up and down, like we've seen here in Korea, every day the Kospi is like jumping on some news, going down on others. Like on Friday, it kind of went back up because of this thought of, okay, maybe they'll negotiate some passage of the strait. But again, so, at this point, I guess we'll see what happens tomorrow. I mean, obviously here in Korea, throughout Asia, a lot of the rest of the world, Europe too. I mean, it's already feeling the brunt of this in a way that maybe, the U.S. is seeing it at the gas prices, but here in Korea, we're already seeing, discussions of rationing vehicle use and even, rationing the use of plastic garbage bags for trash. So, it's worse in Southeast Asia. I had a friend in Manila saying that it's basically already like it reminds them of the COVID period. Nobody's going out, nobody's moving around, because of this gas shortage and fear of more shortages. So, we're all already feeling the brunt. But yeah, I guess we'll see what happens with the new deadline.
With the new deadline set for Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern time, which would be 9 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, South Korea time.
Yes, correct.
Right. Chloe, as Thomas just said, Mr. Trump has reaffirmed, that is, his resolve to wreak havoc in Iran if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened. Could you tell us a bit more about this, as well as Iran's response to this new threat?
Yeah, so as Thomas was saying, if you look at the Truth Social account of Donald Trump, you can see large amount of different ultimatums. So the one we can speak about is the one that he posted on Saturday on his social media, where he was giving a 48-hour deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or, and I'm going to quote him, "hell will rain down." So the idea was for him that the Strait of Hormuz has to be open. He's been very adamant on that, saying that this is the main thing that should happen for a ceasefire or any negotiations to go on. At the time, we could say that some Republicans were also very strongly following on Donald Trump's idea. One of the Republican senators was praising this ultimatum, saying that massive military operation awaits Iran if they choose poorly. At the time, Iran decided not to listen to Donald Trump and to that specific ultimatum. So I'm very speaking about the one that was supposed to be finished today, actually. So not the new one that was set up for tomorrow night. So the answer from Iran came through the French press agency, AFP. And they explained the Central Military Command rejected Donald Trump's threat, and they say that the president's threat was a helpless, nervous, unbalanced, and stupid action. So we see that Iran is not taking the bait and does not want to negotiate on opening back the Hormuz Straits. They've been also saying more recently that the strait will remain closed until Tehran receives payment for war damages. So they're kind of taking Donald Trump on his own game there, like putting their own condition as well. And as Thomas was saying, actually, we're going to see what will happen in the coming days and to the next deadline or the next one if Donald Trump still changes the deadlines, but it's a very ongoing situation.
Right, it is. Thomas, also this past weekend we heard about the dramatic rescue mission of a U.S. airman whose U.S. fighter jet went down in Iran after being shot. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular mission?
Yeah, this definitely seems like something that a movie will be made of it, probably. I'm sure I can see the treatments already in play, and there's been some really, really detailed reporting that's come out since this mission was successful. I mean, I was looking at the New York Times, had a very, very long, almost like a minute-by-minute TikTok of the rescue, and, with multiple bylines and multiple sources, which, kind of tells you already clearly the U.S. military wanted this story to sort of get out there as this kind of adventure, maybe something that people could kind of latch onto as a, for an unpopular so far war, this kind of heroic mission. But yeah, so it was basically this F-15E Strike Eagle jet was shot down on Friday in Iran. There was two crew members and both ejected, and the pilot was rescued fairly soon afterwards, but then there was he was a weapons systems officer who was a colonel, and was not found for a while, and there wasn't, we didn't know where he was, and there was a search on for him, and Iranian state media was reporting that they would offer rewards for his capture, and clearly he would be a valuable asset for negotiations if they were to capture him. And there was just this today, I believe it was, this detailed account in the New York Times where it described what happened next, and basically this colonel had managed to hike up a 7,000-foot high ridgeline, which I guess is a couple thousand meters or something, and wedged himself into a crevice and was hiding there. And he has a beacon that he could sort of ping every once in a while. Didn't want to leave it on, I think, for too long to signal that where he was. And then apparently, like 14 hours after the jet went down, some U.S. forces got the signal from where he was, and they were doing reconnaissance. And they realized there were already like Iranian forces were surrounding this base of this mountain where he was hiding. And there's they went into action. Apparently, the CIA spread this false information that he had been found and was being transported out of the country, hoping that would divert resources in that direction. And then they just basically had assembled this team of special operations forces. It's like SEAL Team 6, Delta Force Commandos, that kind of thing. And then they, some helicopters went to the mountain range where he was hiding. And I guess some officials to the Times described it as one of the most challenging and complex and special ops history. Had this mountainous terrain, the Iranian forces all around. Did some bombing to set the ground, and then, basically were able to parachute in and whisk him away. And then even apparently there's this final twist where they had set up like a landing strip or a runway off in the sort of sandy desert area within Iran. And when they got there, these C-130 transport aircraft were stuck in the sand, and they had to wait to bring more planes in. And so eventually they extricated him. And it is this, incredible story of operational success and brilliance. But, at the same time, from a kind of stepping back from a journalistic perspective, you realize, okay, this is a story they were very eager to share the details of. In a sense, it does give you something to kind of maybe to the public to latch onto and see this, sort of stories of heroism, again, in a war that otherwise has been very, undefined as to why, the U.S. is doing it and what the objectives are, and has been unpopular. So, this is a story of, it's an incredible tale. Obviously the operational
success. It's great to know that
amazing.
He's safe and sound.
Yeah.
I was aware he tried to evade capture for 36 hours deep in Iran before he was rescued, of course.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Right. Yeah. In the meantime, Chloe, let's move on then. What appears to be the status of ties between Europe and the US amid the unrest in the Middle East?
Well, we could ask ourselves if we're at a breaking point, actually. It's been said by a few pundits and in a few European medias. So from the United States perspective, Donald Trump is quite unhappy with the fact that the European allies have not been joining in on the war in Iran, when he asked for multiple people, also to South Korea and Japan at the time, to join and join the forces to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. So Donald Trump has said quite a few times already that he's unhappy with the allies and the European allies not being there when he needed them, while he was, well, not him, but the United States were there when Europe needed him. So, on the other side, the European Union's members are just saying like they're not okay with being dragged into a war that they've not consent to, that they have not even been consulted on. It's true that it's against international order, it's against multilateralism, that are elements that are quite important for the European nations. So it's obviously quite hard for them to be getting into the war game that's been the US has been playing there. And it's just obviously a very strong and point of tension now, but it's been going on for months, the unhappiness between the US and Europe with the tariff wars that Donald Trump has been imposing on every other country, the threats to leave NATO that he has been doing again. He's always questioning the fact that the US could leave NATO, the pressures to allies to spend more money on their defense budget. So it's been happening also here in South Korea, been happening in Europe as well. And now there's the thing that the European Union knows that the US were, after the World War II, after the Korean War, they were kind of the key country for this new order of the world, with more peaceful. So, for example, NATO was made to make sure that war should not be happening again, and that multilateralism and international order should be followed. So the fact that this main player is not the one who's jeopardizing the international order is kind of a hard truth for the European nation. And we've seen it, for example, very recently on Thursday and Friday. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, was here in South Korea. Before that, he was also in Japan. And he's been saying for all the days that he's been here that now to stay independent. Countries the size of France, of Japan, of South Korea, so smaller, like he was also speaking about the Canada, for example, saying countries who want to stay independent from the US should kind of unite and collaborate together to try to also reach their part and show in the diplomatical order what they are thinking about. And he was also saying that Europe now can be considered as more of a good partner for South Korea, for example, because he said we are predictable, unlike the United States. So that's I would say one of the important things for the European Union members now is seeing that this very historical ally and strong ally that the United States are is kind of being unpredictable, and more so every day. So I don't know how much further it could go before the countries might be speaking against the US with more.
Right, and against the backdrop of these tensions between Europe and the US, with regard to the Strait of Hormuz, Thomas, I understand that Iran has offered an alternative to Europe and Asia with regard to transiting this particular region. Could you tell us a bit more about this option and its broader implications?
Yeah, sure. Well, an Iranian official, the head of Government Information Council, had announced on state TV last week that he had extended this offer to European, Asian, and Arab nations to negotiate transit access through the Strait of Hormuz. And this has already been kind of in place. There's one sort of the shipping journal called Lloyd's List is calling it Tehran's toll booth. They've already set up a system to allow passage negotiated basically either some friendly countries' vessels, but there's also a payment system that they've set up. And the twist of it, though, is that they want payment in Chinese yuan or crypto, so not dollars. And there's been reports, CNN reported, that at least 2 ships have already done this payment, one Japanese and one French in yuan for safe passage. And so, just obviously setting up this system in the first place is a big change in the way that the oil and gas has flowed through that strait. But, some analysts have hit on this bigger picture, particularly as regards the currency side of it. That is, the Deutsche Bank did an assessment last week, basically saying that this might trigger a challenge to the petrodollar system, which has really been in place for more than 50 years, where the U.S. and Gulf states basically agreed to, just set the price of oil to the dollar, and that's been in place for decades, and it kind of ties to the whole U.S. as a world's reserve currency, which has been in place even longer than that. And so, this idea that now these alternate payments are going to be part of this proposed system, I think there's a sense that, people question how much it may be a genuine threat to the dollar's long-term status. But, this yuan for passage arrangement does go along with some of these efforts from, China has been trying to push its own currency as a global reserve. And we've seen a few, Russia has kind of moved to doing its energy payments in the yuan, and India was even recently trying some alternative payments, and the BRICS countries were talking about setting up their own. So, the U.S. has a lot of entrenched strength in this global dollar system, but, you are seeing, pushes against it in a way that and as much as the global and geopolitical order is kind of shifting around a bit lately, and I think this really is a sort of direct and concentrated version of what potentially is a challenge to the dollar's strength. And it would be a very significant change in just within the U.S.'s own the security and just everything, the low interest rates that the U.S. has enjoyed with the dollar as a global reserve currency for decades and decades. This is something that at the very least seems to be another upheaval that this Iran conflict is kind of bringing to the world stage.
Right. And speaking about oil supplies, Chloe, speaking to your media outlet, some energy pundits have said that the EU currently is facing its largest oil supply disruption in history. Could you share their concerns with us a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So in an interview with France 24, Francesco Sassi, who is an expert in energy geopolitics from the University of Oslo, said that there's been a problem with this energy crisis in Europe because, according to him, the European Union has not been sincere on the real consequences for the population of this crisis as for now. So they've been kind of, according to him, hiding a bit what's really happening, so because of that, the measures are not up to date yet, and probably population are not aware enough of what's going on. So he has been raising, let's say, if I should make a shorter version of it, 3 main fears according to him. The first one is that there's a toolbox of measures that have been offered by the European Union to state members so that they could try to pick it up inside there, some measures to help alleviate the consequences of the blockade and the oil crisis that's going on. But he said that the problem is that the longer the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz goes on, the more severe the measures should actually be. And he said that there's probably a delay there happening. And it's, according to him, the fear is that national government might at one point take action for their own countries without looking at the European level. And so they might take actions to put subsidies to make sure that people don't feel too much the cost of energy rising, or they might do action to secure by themselves some oil or energy supplies elements, and that would have very strong consequences. That would be like raising the cost of oil for all of the European Union. The second thing is, according to him, that currently the consequences are mostly felt in the Asian economies, so not in Europe yet. But the problem is because, I mean, the whole world is working together and trade is international. He's saying the European Union and countries are also going to feel at one point with delay the consequences that are impacting now Asia, because both sides of the world are working together and trading together. So at one point the prices will be felt at a rising cost for Europe as well. And the third thing is, according to him, free flow of energy supply is one of the main fundamental laws of international trade. So it can only work because everyone can get access to energy. But he say because now we're seeing unilateral blockades like the one with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, is also saying that, for example, the Houthis could be doing the same from their side. So international markets will suffer, and he thinks that new alliances will probably be seen in the upcoming months, for example, between people who could provide oil and the ones who want to buy it. And he was, for example, giving the example of Russia. That could be one of the new provider and making the world exchange a bit different now, with Russia coming back onto the international scene.
Right, I see. Thomas, we have time for one very quick, brief question I'd like to touch upon. It's about the speculation with regard to a potential ground invasion by U.S. troops into Iran. Very briefly speaking, what are some potential scenarios that have been shared?
Well, there are multiple scenarios. I think a full-scale ground invasion is seen as incredibly challenging, much more difficult than something like the invasion of Iraq. Iran is much larger, it's 90 million people, very mountainous, and has around 1 million troops, apparently 4,000 tanks or so. And I think the challenge would be coming from these drone swarm attacks, ballistic missiles, and the Pentagon war gamed it out last year and basically said it would require hundreds of thousands of troops, years of occupation, and massive casualties. There's been other speculation that an attack might just be more focused. There's been a lot of talk about Kharg Island, which is the kind of hub of the Iranian oil processing in the Strait of Hormuz, and even that may be more manageable in scale, but would also potentially have a lot of knock-on effects of just regional responses from Iran could respond to attacking other regional oil supplying things, and it would be, I think everyone thinks it would be incredibly challenging. At the same time, there are signs that the U.S. is potentially preparing for that. Last week they doubled the number of A-10 aircraft, which are these close air support aircraft that are often used in conjunction with the ground attack, and there's something like 50,000 troops already in the region. So there are signs that Washington is definitely considering it, but I think everyone agrees that it would be, extremely challenging and potentially, enormously costly in a way that we haven't really seen before.
Right, I'm sure many are hoping that will not be the case, though, ground invasion. All right, Thomas, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Chloe, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.